The first sign that the universe had underestimated humanity was not a weapon discharge or a broken treaty, but a miscalculation of patience. The observers from the Karun assemblage had watched the human frontier for 3 generations, measuring reaction times, resource flows, and the emotional volatility of a species that insisted on telling stories about itself even while it starved. Their conclusion had been unanimous and disastrously wrong. Humans endured. Humans adapted. Humans delayed retaliation until it could be delivered with interest. When the listening arrays around the amber star of Talem finally recorded the shift in human fleet patterns, the assemblage analysts argued that it was merely another internal migration, another civil shudder of a young species that could not hold still. They were still arguing when the first human ship crossed the heliopause with its lights off and its gravity profile folded inward like a held breath. Asha Varind stood at the forward observation blister of the vessel that carried her name in registry but not in spirit. The ship was called Unanswerable Weight by the crews who had built it from plates salvaged out of decommissioned habitats and the bones of broken freighters. Official registries listed it under a string of numbers and syllables that meant nothing to anyone who mattered. Asha had never asked for her name to be painted on the hull, but the welders had done it anyway, etching each letter deep enough that micrometeoroids would polish them rather than erase them. She had not objected. Names had weight, and she had learned to use weight as a tool. Outside the blister, Talem burned with a clean, indifferent light. Inside, the ship hummed with a layered vibration that Asha felt through her boots and into her teeth. The hum was not comforting. Comfort was a luxury she had not trusted since the day the Karun patrols had burned the river cities of Asterfold because a sensor buoy had been nudged out of alignment. Millions had died because of a rounding error and an apology transmitted too late to matter. The assemblage had sent compensation in the form of processed metals and a statement of regret that used the same phrasing reserved for failed crop cycles. Humanity had accepted the metals and buried the statement. Behind Asha, the bridge crew moved with deliberate quiet. No one spoke unless necessary. Voices were tools that could slip, and this was a moment for steady hands. The tactical coordinator, a broad-shouldered woman named Kesh Talarin, watched layered projections of space where faint ghost lines represented possible trajectories of ships that did not yet know they were being hunted. The navigation lead, Horam Vance, adjusted microburns with fingers that bore old scars from manual docking clamps. Every person on the bridge had learned their craft in places where mistakes cost lives rather than promotions. Asha turned from the blister and addressed them without raising her voice. She did not need to. The ship listened to her the way a canyon listens to falling stone. We cross the boundary in 12 heartbeats. Keep emissions folded. If anything pings us, it will be because they already know we are here. Kesh did not look up. They will know. The assemblage prides itself on knowing. The question is whether they understand. Asha allowed herself a thin smile. Understanding is optional. The unanswerable weight slid forward, its mass distribution shifting in ways that would have made older engineers blanch. Human ships had learned to cheat gravity by respecting it, bending fields with the same care a mason gave to arches. Where the assemblage relied on brute force generators that announced themselves across light minutes, human designs whispered. They had learned this lesson the hard way, after watching their first interstellar armadas light up like festival lanterns and die just as brightly. As the boundary dissolved around them, space seemed to thicken. Talem's outer defenses were a lattice of autonomous platforms and sensor nodes, arranged according to principles the assemblage believed elegant. They had never considered that elegance could be predicted. The unanswerable weight threaded through the lattice along a path that existed only because a human mathematician named Sarai Pell had refused to accept that non-Euclidean topologies were impractical. Pell had died years earlier, crushed in an industrial accident that would have been preventable if safety budgets had not been diverted to propaganda. Her equations lived on, carved into ships like prayers. The first platform drifted past, close enough that Asha could see the etched insignia of the assemblage, a pattern meant to evoke unity through repetition. She felt a familiar tightening in her chest. Anger was present, but it was cold, shaped by memory into something useful. She had been on Asta Fold when the river cities burned. She had pulled children from water that boiled around her hands and learned that screams could be quieter than steam. The ship cleared the outer lattice without incident. Only then did Kesh speak again. "We are ghosts so far." "Good," Asha said. "Ghosts are patient." Patience had been humanity's shield when shields failed. For decades after first contact, human diplomats had endured condescension wrapped in protocol. The assemblage had classified humanity as a peripheral negotiant species, a category reserved for cultures that displayed ingenuity but lacked cohesion. It had been a convenient label, one that justified limited engagement and experimental incursions. When human colonies protested the slow erosion of their autonomy, assemblage mediators had offered frameworks and committees. When human ships were boarded and stripped under the pretense of safety inspections, assemblage lawkeepers had cited clauses written in languages no human had been invited to help translate. Asha had read those clauses. She had memorized them. She had learned how to read what was not written. The assemblage believed that rules were a kind of gravity, pulling behavior into predictable orbits. Humanity had learned that gravity could be slingshot. The inner system defenses were more alert. Energy signatures flared and dimmed as patrol craft adjusted their vectors. Asha watched them with a professional eye. They were fast and well-armed, but they moved like dancers following choreography written by someone who had never been punched. The unanswerable weight slipped between them, its profile folded so tightly that it might have been mistaken for a shadow cast by Talem itself. "Contact," Horam said quietly. "Passive reflection on our port flank." "One of theirs is looking at its own ghost and wondering why it feels wrong." Asha nodded. "Hold." Seconds stretched. The human ship drifted, mass balanced on a knife edge. The patrol craft veered away, satisfied or confused enough to continue its circuit. Asha exhaled, the first breath she had taken in minutes. She did not allow herself a second. They reached their insertion point above Talem's third planet, a world of shallow seas and dense archipelagos where the assemblage maintained a logistics hub. The hub was officially neutral, a place where member species could exchange goods under the watchful eyes of regulators. Unofficially, it was a choke point. Human freighters that passed through were delayed and searched, their crews treated like curiosities, data packets vanished, cargoes were reclassified, protests were logged and lost. "Deploy," Asha said. The unanswerable weight opened itself, not with bay doors but with a controlled shedding of mass. Pods slipped free, each carrying teams trained for work that would never be acknowledged. They fell toward the planet on trajectories calculated to mimic debris. The assemblage watched debris all the time. It was safer than watching intent. Asha remained aboard. This phase required her elsewhere. She turned to Kesh. Status of the relay. Kesh brought up a projection of a structure hidden within the planet's Lagrange shadow, a tangle of spines and rings that gathered and redistributed information across assemblage space. "Still humming. Encryption layers are deep. Our people will need time." "They will have it," Asha said. "I am going to knock." She moved from the bridge to a smaller chamber lined with field projectors. At its center stood a chair that did not look like much, a human solution to a problem that other species solved with elaborate neural thrones. Asha sat and placed her hands on the armrests. The ship recognized her touch and unfolded its attention around her. Communication with the assemblage required a particular kind of honesty. Their envoys prized transparency, meaning they believed that what could be measured was what mattered. Human communicators had learned to exploit this by presenting truths stripped of context, letting the listeners supply assumptions. Asha prepared to do something different. She would present context, whether they wanted it or not. The signal went out on channels reserved for emergencies. Within moments, it was answered by a council of projections, each representing a different assemblage polity. Their forms were abstracted to avoid offense, but Asha could read the subtle cues of hierarchy in the way they arranged themselves. She did not bother with greetings. "This is Asha Verind of the human vessel Unanswerable Weight," she said. "I am here regarding your activities on Asta Fold and the subsequent pattern of engagement along our frontier." There was a pause, then a response, modulated and calm. "Human representative, your presence in this system is unauthorized. Withdraw immediately and submit your grievance through appropriate channels." Asha leaned forward. "Those channels have been used. They have been exhausted. They have been used again. I am here because your channels function as filters, not conduits." Another pause, shorter this time. "Your assertion is noted. Compensation was rendered for the incident you reference. Further discussion requires mediation." "Compensation is not consequence," Asha said. "You destroyed cities because your instruments misread a signal. You dismissed the deaths as acceptable loss. You continued the behavior that made such loss inevitable. This is not an incident, it is a method." A ripple passed through the projections. "Your tone is inappropriate." Asha smiled, though they could not see it. "Your understanding of tone is insufficient." She gestured, and Kesh initiated the next phase. Across the system, small disturbances blossomed as human teams reached their targets. Nothing exploded, nothing burned. Instead, data flows hiccuped, schedules slipped, permissions cascaded into denial loops. The assemblage prized order, and Asha was introducing entropy with a scalpel. "You are interfering with sovereign infrastructure," one projection said, its modulation tightening. "This will be construed as an act of hostility." "Yes," Asha replied, "it will." There it was, the line humanity had been waiting to cross, not because it desired war, but because it understood inevitability. The assemblage believed that conflict could be avoided through sufficient procedure. Humanity had learned that procedure could be weaponized by those who wrote it. "You underestimate your position," the projection continued. "Your species lacks the cohesion to sustain escalation. Your internal divisions are documented." Ashath thought of the ship's hull, of welders carving her name into steel salvaged from 100 places. She thought of Asta Fold, of hands clasped in boiling water. She spoke slowly. "We are divided in ways you recognize and united in ways you do not measure. You count fleets, we count hands." Silence followed, but not the kind that comforted. It was the sound of recalculation. "Withdraw," the projection said again, less certain. "Negotiations can be arranged." "Negotiations will occur," Asha said. "They will occur after you experience uncertainty. After you understand that your methods produce responses you cannot bound." She cut the channel. The ship shuddered as something large adjusted course nearby. Kesh's voice crackled through the chamber. "They are mobilizing heavy assets." Asha stood. "Good. They will bring their certainty with them." She returned to the bridge in time to see the first assemblage warform emerge from behind Talem's third planet, its geometry aggressive and confident. It was larger than the unanswerable weight by an order of magnitude, bristling with emitters that could carve continents. Asha did not flinch. "Bring us about," she said. "Let them see us." The human ship unfolded its profile, letting its mass announce itself. Lights bloomed along the hull, not bright but steady. The assemblage warform hesitated, sensors recalibrating. It had expected a target that fled or pleaded. It found one that waited. "Open a channel," Asha said. Kesh complied. "This is your last warning," the assemblage commander transmitted. "You will be neutralized." Asha answered without raising her voice. "You will be measured." The first exchange was brief and brutal. The warform fired, beams lancing through space with surgical precision. The unanswerable weight moved, not dodging so much as choosing where to be struck. Fields flared, plates ablated. The ship absorbed punishment that would have shattered older designs. In return, it did not fire weapons in the way the assemblage understood. It altered gravity. The warform's trajectory bent. Its own mass betrayed it, pulled into a curve that stressed its frame. Emitters misaligned. A second human ship decloaked, then a third, then a dozen, each one a study in repurposed brutality. They did not form ranks. They formed possibilities. Asha watched the battle unfold with a distant calm. This was not triumph. It was demonstration. Humanity was showing its work. As the assemblage warform struggled, its commander transmitted again, urgency bleeding through modulation. "Cease. This engagement is illogical." Asha responded, and her voice carried the weight of every delayed apology. "So was burning our cities." The warform broke apart, not in an explosion, but in a series of structural failures that sent pieces drifting like confetti from a shattered doctrine. The human ships did not pursue the debris. They held position, a line drawn in space. Kesh exhaled. "They will not forget this." "No," Asha said, "they will not." She turned back toward Talem, toward a star that burned as it always had, indifferent to classifications and committees. Humanity had stepped into the light not as a supplicant, but as a force that understood gravity and patience and the terrible usefulness of names carved deep enough to endure. This was only the beginning. The assemblage response to uncertainty was not panic but procedure, and so the aftermath of the engagement above Talem unfolded first as meetings rather than mobilizations. Councils convened across light years, projections layered with annotations and probability fields. They replayed sensor logs frame by frame, watching the human ships bend vectors without firing conventional weapons, watching a warform designed to intimidate entire regions fail because it trusted mass over adaptability. Analysts argued over classifications. Was this a new doctrine or a statistical anomaly? Was Asha Verind an outlier personality or the visible edge of a broader shift? The assemblage had encountered defiance before, but defiance that arrived without bombast unsettled them more than rebellion ever had. On Talem's third planet, the logistics hub continued to function, but not smoothly. Human teams embedded deep within its infrastructure worked with a discipline born of scarcity. They did not destroy data, because destruction invited repair. Instead, they reordered it. Shipping priorities inverted. Maintenance cycles slipped by margins small enough to escape immediate notice, but large enough to compound. Oversight algorithms began flagging one another, each convinced the other had erred. The assemblage valued redundancy, but redundancy assumed honesty between layers. Humanity was teaching them what it meant to be misled, without being lied to. Asha Verind watched reports stream in from a quiet alcove of the unanswerable weight, her posture relaxed, but her attention razor-sharp. She had not slept since before the engagement, but exhaustion was an old companion that no longer demanded acknowledgement. Each report carried more than data. It carried lives, names she knew and names she did not, people who had volunteered for work that would never be celebrated. If they succeeded, history would call it inevitability. If they failed, history would call it nothing at all. Kesh Talarin joined her, leaning against the bulkhead with the casual grace of someone who trusted the ship to hold. "They are consolidating," Kesh said. "Not just here. Along the frontier, patrol patterns are tightening. They have learned we do not announce," Asha replied. "That lesson will cost them time." "Time buys them options," Kesh said. "They have more ships than we do, more worlds." "They have more certainty than we do," Asha said. "Certainty is heavier." Kesh considered that, then nodded. "The relay team reports partial access. They cannot read everything, but they can listen." "Good," Asha said. "Listening is enough." She closed her eyes and let the ship's subtle vibrations ground her. She thought of Earth, not as a singular cradle, but as a network of scars and stubbornness. Humanity had not spread among the stars because it was united in vision. It had spread because people kept leaving places that failed them and building new ones that might. The assemblage had mistaken that restlessness for weakness. They had not understood that a species accustomed to migration learned to carry its cohesion internally rather than embedding it in monuments. A priority signal cut through the ambient flow. Asha opened her eyes, put it through. The projection that formed was not an assemblage counselor, but a human face, older than Asha by a decade, with skin weathered by radiation exposure and gravity shifts. Her name was Neryl Othays, and she had once been a dock supervisor on a station the assemblage had fined into abandonment. "We have a problem," Neryl said without preamble. "They are detaining civilians, human crews transiting neutral space, calling it precautionary." Asha's jaw tightened. "Where? Multiple nodes," Neryl said. "Mostly transport hubs. They are not violent, yet." "They will be," Kesh said quietly. Asha nodded. "They are testing us. They believe we will escalate emotionally." "What do we do?" Neryl asked. "We respond proportionally," Asha said. "We document, we broadcast. We make it impossible for them to pretend this is contained." "They control the channels," Neryl said. "Not all of them," Asha replied. "Humanity learned long ago that if you do not own the road, you build paths between the trees." The projection flickered as data packets routed through non-standard relays, through pirate networks and academic exchanges and personal message chains that had never been designed for propaganda but would serve. Images of detentions spread, accompanied by context, by histories, by names, not slogans. Names. Within hours, assemblage peripheral species began asking questions. Traders from minor polities complained of delays. Observers requested clarification. The assemblage issued statements couched in neutrality, but the volume of inquiry forced them to elaborate, and elaboration revealed seams. In a council chamber far from Talem, an assemblage coordinator named Ithrek Val convened an emergency session. Ithrek had built a career on managing asymmetries, smoothing interactions between species that did not share assumptions. Humanity unsettled him because it refused to behave like a managed variable. He addressed the projections with measured urgency. "The human incursion demonstrates a capacity we did not fully model," Ithrek said. "They are not seeking immediate territorial gain. They are degrading trust in our systems." A projection representing a militarized polity pulsed. "Trust can be enforced." "Trust enforced is compliance," Ithrek replied. "Compliance without belief fractures under stress." Another projection shifted. "Are you suggesting concession?" "I am suggesting recalibration," Ithrek said. "We assumed they would respond to pressure by fragmenting. Instead, pressure has aligned them." "Temporarily," the militarized projection said. "Perhaps," Ithrek conceded, "but temporality is not trivial. A delayed response can become precedent." The session devolved into familiar patterns, factions advocating for displays of force, others for renewed diplomacy. Ithrek listened and catalogued, but his thoughts kept returning to the human commander who had spoken without raising her voice. Asha Verind had not threatened, she had described. Back aboard the unanswerable weight, the situation evolved. Assemblage-heavy assets maintained distance, wary of repeating Talem's lesson. Skirmishes flared elsewhere, brief and contained, human ships withdrawing after altering local conditions just enough to complicate operations. No worlds burned, no capitals fell. Instead, the assemblage found itself working harder to achieve the same outcomes, its vast machinery grinding against friction it had never accounted for. Asha convened her senior staff in the ship's commons, a space deliberately designed to feel unfinished. Exposed conduits ran along the walls, and the tables bore scars from previous uses. She preferred it that way. Perfection invited reverence. Imperfection invited engagement. "We are entering the phase they will not understand," she said. "They expect escalation to look like accumulation, more ships, more firepower. We will give them dispersion." Horam leaned forward. "You want to spread?" "I want to seed," Asha replied. "We have allies who do not know they are allies yet, peripheral species constrained by assemblage frameworks." They chafe quietly, we show them options. That risks broadening the conflict, Kesh said. Yes, Asha agreed, but it also broadens accountability. The assemblage cannot punish everyone without revealing itself. A murmur of assent moved through the room. These were people who understood risk not as something to be minimized, but as something to be shaped. Teams will redeploy, Asha continued. Not as soldiers, but as engineers, mediators, traders. We offer assistance where assemblage protocols have failed. We document everything, we do not lie. And if we are attacked, someone asked. We endure, Asha said. Endurance is not passivity. As plans took shape, a new signal arrived, routed through layers of obfuscation that suggested both caution and desperation. Asha accepted it alone. The projection that formed was unlike the others she had seen. Its geometry was fluid, shifting subtly as if testing the boundaries of representation. This channel is unofficial, the projection said. I speak without mandate. Then speak carefully, Asha replied. I am Ithrek Val, it said. I oversee interspecies coordination for the assemblage. Asha recognized the name. You are taking a risk. Yes, Ithrek said. I believe misunderstanding has reached a critical threshold. Misunderstanding implies symmetry, Asha said. What do you want? To understand your objective, Ithrek said. You are not pursuing conquest. You are not signaling withdrawal. You are destabilizing. I am correcting, Asha replied. Your systems externalize cost. You harm and apologize later. We are internalizing that cost for you. That path leads to collapse, Ithrek said. For both of us. Collapse of what? Asha asked. Your convenience. There was a pause longer than before. Our order, Ithrek said. Order that requires others to be expendable is not order, Asha said. It is accounting. You will provoke responses you cannot control, Ithrek said. We already live with responses we cannot control, Asha replied. The difference is agency. Ithrek's projection shifted, its fluidity betraying strain. What would satisfy you? Asha considered. This was not a negotiation. It was a probe. Transparency, she said. Shared authorship of the rules that govern our interactions. Consequence proportional to harm, not convenience. Recognition that we are not peripheral. That would require restructuring at a fundamental level, Ithrek said. Yes, Asha said. Many will resist, Ithrek said. Many already do, Asha replied. The channel cut. Asha sat back, feeling the weight of what she had said settle into the ship. There would be no clean resolution. There never was. But there was momentum, and momentum could be guided. Days stretched into weeks. Assemblage detentions eased under scrutiny. Some humans were released quietly, others after public hearings that revealed the thinness of the justifications. Peripheral species began requesting human consultants, citing efficiency gains. Assemblage regulators bristled but could not refuse without contradicting their own mandates. There were losses. A human ship was ambushed near a mining world, its crew killed when a patrol overreacted to a sensor glitch. Asha attended the memorial remotely, watching faces she knew stand together without ceremony. She added the names to a list she carried not as a burden, but as a compass. The assemblage struck back in subtler ways, tightening trade, applying pressure through intermediaries. Humanity absorbed it, redistributed it, turned it into stories that traveled faster than official channels. Children on frontier worlds learned the names of people like Asha Verind not as heroes, but as examples of persistence. In a quiet moment, Asha returned to the observation blister. Talem was distant now, a bright point among many. She rested her hand against the transparent barrier, feeling the faint hum of fields that kept vacuum at bay. She thought of the welders who had carved her name into the hull, of Saripel's equations, of rivers that had boiled and hands that had not let go. The universe was large, and humanity was small, but size had never been the measure that mattered. Gravity did not care about intention. It cared about mass and distance and time. Humanity had learned to work with those. Behind her, the unanswerable weight adjusted course, not toward a single destination, but along a path that intersected many. The assemblage would respond. They always did. The question was no longer whether humanity would endure that response, but what the response would become after passing through unyielding hands. The assemblage learned, as all large systems eventually did, that pressure applied evenly produced uneven results. In regions where human presence had been marginal, their influence now manifested through small but persistent changes. Ports that once followed assemblage scheduling doctrines to the letter began experimenting with hybrid frameworks. Arbitration councils quietly invited human observers, then human contributors. Nothing about it looked like rebellion. It looked like optimization, and optimization was a language the assemblage respected even when it eroded their authority. HFY spent less time issuing directives and more time reading consequences. The unanswerable weight had become a mobile nerve center, not by design but by necessity. Information flowed toward it because it did not demand allegiance, only clarity. Reports arrived from mining collectives on cold moons where assemblage quotas had ignored geological realities, now adjusted after human engineers demonstrated failure curves the regulators could not dismiss. Messages came from water worlds where enforcement patrols had retreated slightly, enough for local councils to renegotiate terms they had once accepted as immutable. Not all of it was progress. In several systems, assemblage hardliners tightened their grip, citing the need to prevent human contamination. Travel advisories hardened into blockades. Peripheral species were warned that collaboration would be noted and remembered. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Memory, in the assemblage lexicon, was a form of punishment. Kesh Talarin brought the latest compilation to HFY during a lull between movements. The ship drifted through a region of interstellar medium dense enough to provide natural masking, a place where stars seemed muted and distant. They are fracturing internally, Kesh said. Not publicly, but patterns are diverging. HFY skimmed the data. They built consensus by smoothing differences. Now differences are accumulating faster than they can be smoothed. That makes them dangerous, Kesh said. Uncertainty plus pride. Yes, HFY agreed, which is why we do not give them a single target. The assemblage's answer came sooner than expected, not as a fleet action, but as an announcement. Across regulated channels, a new classification was introduced. Humanity was designated a disruptive integrator species, a term that sounded neutral but carried implications. Disruptive species were subject to enhanced oversight, restricted access to certain technologies, and preemptive arbitration. It was an attempt to reassert narrative control. Human response was immediate and decentralized. Academics published critiques dissecting the classification's internal contradictions. Traders rerouted shipments through unregulated paths, demonstrating the economic cost of restriction. Peripheral species noted that the criteria for disruption could apply to anyone who improved efficiency without authorization. The label began to fray under scrutiny. HFY watched this unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and caution. Labels were tools. Tools could cut both ways. In a system far from Talem, a human team encountered resistance that did not fit established patterns. The world, a high-gravity planet with layered cloud decks, was home to a species the assemblage had long treated as compliant. Their councils had rarely objected to quotas or patrols. Now they requested human mediation after an assemblage extraction operation destabilized their atmosphere. HFY reviewed the request personally. "They are afraid," she said to Horam, "not just of the damage, but of being seen asking for help." "That fear is learned," Horam replied, "and learning can be unlearned." A human delegation was dispatched, carrying instruments rather than weapons. They worked alongside local scientists, modeling atmospheric feedback loops that assemblage extractors had ignored. The findings were shared openly, including projections of long-term collapse if operations continued unchanged. When assemblage regulators dismissed the models as speculative, the local councils released historical data showing early warning signs that had been suppressed. The situation escalated when an assemblage enforcement vessel arrived to assert authority. It did not fire. It did not need to. Its presence was a reminder of hierarchy. The human delegation refused to leave, citing joint research agreements with the locals. The locals stood with them, a physical alignment that sensors recorded and analysts later replayed with unease. Asha monitored the standoff remotely. She did not intervene directly. This was not her confrontation to own. After days of tension, the enforcement vessel withdrew, citing the need for further review. It was a small victory, but it echoed. Within the assemblage, Ithrek Val faced increasing isolation. His attempts to advocate recalibration were met with procedural delays and reassignment threats. He continued anyway, because he had seen the alternative. He convened informal discussions with counterparts who shared his concern, exchanging observations outside official logs. They spoke of a creeping realization that the assemblage's greatest strength, its scale, was also its greatest vulnerability when adaptability lagged. Ithrek requested another unofficial channel with Asha. She accepted, aware that each exchange increased the cost to him. "You are changing the environment faster than we can adapt," Ithrek said without preamble. "Then adapt faster," Asha replied. "You know it is not that simple," Ithrek said. "Our cohesion depends on predictability." "Predictability for whom?" Asha asked. "For you or for those you manage?" Ithrek's projection dimmed slightly. "You are forcing us to confront assumptions we embedded centuries ago." "Assumptions calcify," Asha said. "They become invisible until they break something." "There are factions pushing for decisive action," Ithrek said. "They argue that allowing your influence to spread threatens the assemblage's legitimacy. Legitimacy that cannot withstand examination is already compromised," Asha replied. "They may strike at symbols," Ithrek warned. "Worlds associated with your origin." Asha felt a familiar tightening. "They already have," she said, "in slow ways." "I am trying to prevent something irreversible," Ithrek said. "So am I," Asha replied. The channel closed with no resolution, only the shared understanding that lines were being drawn by processes larger than either of them. The decisive moment came not with a fleet engagement, but with an accident that everyone knew was no accident. An assemblage oversight platform malfunctioned above a human-settled world, releasing a cascade of kinetic debris. Cities were damaged. Thousands died. The assemblage issued a statement within hours, expressing regret and promising investigation. The language was familiar, too familiar. This time, humanity did not wait. Within days, independent analyses compiled evidence of delayed maintenance approvals and overridden safety warnings. Whistleblowers from within the assemblage leaked internal memos prioritizing throughput over risk. The story spread faster than the official response, carried by networks that trusted names more than seals. Asha addressed humanity publicly for the first time since Talem. Her message was not broadcast from a grand chamber, but from the commons of the unanswerable weight, with exposed conduits and scarred tables visible behind her. "This is not an isolated failure," she said. "It is the predictable outcome of systems that externalize consequence. We grieve, we document, we act." She did not call for vengeance. She did not need to. Assemblage peripheral species began suspending cooperation pending review. Trade slowed. Patrols found themselves unwelcome in ports that once deferred automatically. The assemblage attempted to reassert control through emergency measures. These measures required consensus. Consensus faltered. Ithrek Val resigned publicly, issuing a statement that cited systemic inertia and moral exhaustion. His resignation sent shockwaves through assemblage governance. Others followed, quietly at first, then openly. Asha watched the cascade with grim focus. This was the dangerous phase. Systems under stress often lashed out, and lash out they did. An assemblage strike group emerged near a cluster of human worlds, its mandate framed as stabilization. This time the intent was unmistakable, Ashar convened her commanders. "We cannot allow them to demonstrate dominance here," Kesh said. "If they do, everything we have built fractures." "We cannot meet them head-on," Horam said. "They outmass us." Ashar nodded. "Then we do not meet them as a mass." Human ships dispersed, not retreating but repositioning along vectors that intersected supply lines, communication relays, and gravitational choke points. They did not engage immediately. They waited. The assemblage strike group advanced, confident in its doctrine. As it did, its logistics began to unravel. Resupply convoys were delayed by navigational anomalies. Communications lagged as relays misaligned. Local traffic patterns shifted unexpectedly as civilian vessels exercised newly asserted autonomy. By the time the strike group reached the outskirts of the human worlds, it was no longer cohesive. Its commander requested clarification. None came. Ashar authorized limited engagement. Human ships struck not at hulls, but at assumptions, altering gravitational fields to force constant recalibration. Assemblage weapons misfired or failed to acquire stable solutions. The engagement stretched on, exhausting the strike group without delivering a decisive blow. Eventually, the assemblage withdrew, citing the need for reassessment. The message was clear. Dominance was no longer guaranteed. In the aftermath, humanity did not celebrate. Memorials were held, names were spoken, plans were revised. Ashar stood once more at the observation blister, watching a cluster of human worlds glow faintly against the dark. They were still fragile, they always would be, but fragility did not preclude resilience. The assemblage had believed that order flowed from the center outward. Humanity was demonstrating that order could also emerge from the margins, shaped by hands that refused to let go even when burned. The conflict was no longer about recognition alone. It was about redefining gravity itself, about teaching a vast and ancient system that weight was not only a function of mass, but of responsibility carried and endured. After the withdrawal of the strike group, the assemblage entered a phase that their own historians would later describe as controlled instability. Outwardly, procedures remained intact. Councils convened, metrics were reported, patrols launched on schedule. Inwardly, trust between layers eroded. Commands were second-guessed. Interpretations diverged. The assemblage had been built on the premise that scale compensated for individual deviation. Humanity had introduced deviation that scaled. Ashar felt the shift less as a tactical change and more as a pressure differential. Information arriving aboard the unanswerable weight carried hesitation in its phrasing, gaps where certainty used to sit. Assemblage officials who once spoke with rehearsed assurance now hedged, citing provisional authority. Peripheral polities tested boundaries with carefully worded inquiries. Humanity's role as catalyst became harder to deny. Yet with influence came consequence. Human worlds experienced new strains. Trade disruptions rippled through systems still dependent on assemblage logistics. Some colonies that had aligned openly with human initiatives found themselves isolated, their requests for neutral mediation ignored. The cost of standing visibly increased. Ashar convened a strategic council that included not only military coordinators, but representatives from engineering collectives, agricultural networks, and transit guilds. The meeting took place in a rotating habitat linked temporarily to the unanswerable weight, chosen to accommodate delegates who did not share humanity's tolerance for variable gravity. "We are approaching a threshold," Ashar said, addressing the assembled projections and physical presences. "Our actions have altered the assemblage's behavior, but we have not yet replaced the functions they provided." Disruption without substitution creates suffering. A representative from the outer agrarian world spoke, her image flickering with signal lag. "Our yields are down. Assemblage transport delays mean seed stock arrives late. People are asking whether this path is worth it." "It is worth it," Kesh said, before Ashar could respond, then paused. "But worth is not self-executing." Ashar nodded. "We cannot mirror the assemblage by imposing solutions. We must offer frameworks that can be adopted voluntarily. Horam brought up a series of models. Distributed logistics, he said, shared routing protocols that do not rely on a central authority, redundancy through diversity, not duplication. An engineer from a mining consortium leaned forward. That requires trust across systems that barely know each other. Yes, Ashah said, which is why we start small and we document relentlessly. The Council agreed to pilot programs in regions already experimenting with hybrid governance. Humanity would not claim ownership. It would provide tools, training, and transparency. Failure would be recorded alongside success. As these efforts began, resistance hardened in predictable places. Assemblage hardliners framed the pilots as subversion. Emergency directives attempted to restrict data sharing. Enforcement patrols resumed aggressive inspections in select corridors, targeting vessels associated with human networks. One such inspection escalated into violence when an assemblage patrol fired on a civilian transport after its crew refused an unauthorized boarding. The ship was crippled. Survivors were detained. The incident sparked outrage across human space. Ashaf faced a familiar crossroads. Retaliation would unify human sentiment but validate hardliner narratives. Restraint would be read as weakness by some and abandonment by others. She chose a third path. Within hours, human networks released a comprehensive dossier on the incident, including sensor logs, crew testimonies, and legal analyses citing assemblage statutes violated by the patrol. The dossier was not accompanied by threats or demands. It was accompanied by an invitation to review. Peripheral polities that had long chafed under similar inspections recognized the pattern immediately. They added their own records. The incident ceased to be a bilateral dispute and became a case study in systemic abuse. Assemblage councils were forced to address it publicly. The patrol commander was recalled. Disciplinary proceedings were announced. It was a concession, small but visible. Behind the scenes, however, preparations for escalation continued. Intelligence gathered by human listening posts indicated that a coalition of assemblage factions was advocating for a decisive demonstration near Sol, humanity's point of origin. The symbolism was deliberate. To strike, there would be to assert that no amount of adaptation could erase hierarchy. Ashah absorbed the report in silence. Sol was not humanity's center in a strategic sense, but it was an anchor of narrative. An attack that would reverberate beyond immediate damage. Kesh broke the silence. If they go there, we cannot rely on dispersion alone. Too many eyes, too much meaning. I know, Ashah said, which is why we do not wait for them to arrive. Humanity's response unfolded across months rather than days. Defensive infrastructures around Sol were upgraded, not with overt weaponry, but with layered gravitational modulation fields designed to complicate any approach. Civilian evacuation plans were rehearsed openly, denying the assemblage the element of surprise. At the same time, human diplomats intensified engagement with assemblage moderates, emphasizing the catastrophic loss of legitimacy that a strike on Sol would entail. Ithrek Val, now operating outside formal structures, became an unexpected conduit. Though stripped of authority, he retained relationships and credibility among those uneasy with hardliner rhetoric. He facilitated dialogues that official channels could not, framing restraint not as capitulation but as preservation. Ashas spoke with Ithrek during one such exchange, the channel deliberately routed through multiple relays to obscure its origin. They believe you are testing them, Ithrek said. They believe restraint will embolden you. Restraint has always emboldened us, Ashah replied. Because we use it to prepare. They fear loss of control, Ithrek said. Control is an illusion, Ashah said. Coordination is not. The decisive confrontation did not come at Sol. It came elsewhere, in a system considered peripheral by both parties. An assemblage task force attempted to seize control of a relay hub that had become critical to human distributed logistics. Their move was framed as a regulatory intervention. This time, humanity responded with force, but not fury. Human ships converged, not in overwhelming numbers, but with precision. They disabled the task force's ability to coordinate, isolating vessels and forcing surrender through environmental manipulation rather than destruction. The engagement was broadcast live by neutral observers, its methods dissected in real time. When it ended, the assemblage task force was intact, but impotent, its crews unharmed, its mission failed. Humanity offered to return the vessels under the condition that oversight of the relay hub be renegotiated with local stakeholders. The image of a restrained but decisive human response circulated widely. It undermined the hardliner narrative more effectively than any speech. Within the assemblage, fault lines widened. Some factions called for total disengagement from human space, arguing that the cost of control now outweighed the benefit. Others argued for integration, for shared governance that acknowledged human methods. The very debate signaled a shift unthinkable months earlier. Ashar did not mistake this for victory. Systems that large did not pivot cleanly, but they did pivot. In the quiet aftermath of the relay engagement, Ashar returned once more to the observation blister. She watched as traffic resumed through the hub, ships of multiple species navigating new protocols that balanced autonomy with coordination. It was imperfect. It would fail in places, but it existed. She thought of gravity again, of how it bound objects without regard for intent. Humanity had learned to shape it not by defying it, but by understanding its contours. The assemblage was beginning, painfully, to do the same. The conflict was no longer defined by who could impose order, but by who could sustain it without erasure. And in that emerging equation, humanity's unyielding hands continued to leave their mark, not as conquerors, but as builders who refused to accept that endurance was all they were allowed to be. The first formal rupture within the assemblage did not arrive with declarations or banners, but with a scheduling anomaly. A session of the Central Harmonization Council failed to reach quorum for the first time in its recorded history. Projections flickered as representatives delayed logins, citing consultation requirements, internal reviews, or jurisdictional ambiguities. What would once have been resolved through pressure and precedent now stalled under the weight of competing interpretations. The system that had prided itself on seamless continuity encountered a pause it could not smooth over. Across human space, the pause was felt as an opening rather than a void. Ashar Varind understood better than most that openings could close as abruptly as they appeared. She convened no celebration, issued no proclamation. Instead, she redirected resources towards stabilization, knowing that moments of systemic uncertainty were when populations suffered most. The unanswerable weight moved continuously, rarely lingering in one system long enough to become symbolic. Symbolism attracted attention. Attention attracted simplification. Human distributed logistics networks matured rapidly under pressure. What began as contingency measures evolved into parallel infrastructures. Routing algorithms adjusted dynamically based on trust metrics rather than authority tags. Maintenance responsibilities rotated among participants, preventing the ossification of expertise. Disputes were resolved through transparent arbitration frameworks that prioritized reversibility over finality. Nothing was elegant. Everything was functional. The assemblage observed these developments with a mix of alarm and reluctant admiration. Some analysts dismissed them as unsustainable, arguing that without centralized enforcement, collapse was inevitable. Others noted that the very lack of a center made targeted disruption difficult. Humanity had built something that behaved less like an empire and more like an ecosystem. Tensions flared when an assemblage member polity attempted to withdraw unilaterally from shared oversight agreements, citing the precedent of human autonomy. The move triggered internal sanctions and a cascade of appeals. Humanity did not intervene directly, but their existence as a viable alternative loomed over every argument. For the first time, assemblage members debated not how to enforce compliance, but how to justify it. Asham monitored these debates through filtered channels, aware that overt involvement would be counterproductive. She focused instead on a more immediate threat. Intelligence indicated that a coalition of assemblage hardliners, frustrated by procedural paralysis, was preparing an unsanctioned operation. Their target was not Sol, but a ring of mixed-species worlds that had adopted human logistical frameworks. The objective was to demonstrate that deviation invited consequence. The coalition lacked formal mandate, but possessed significant firepower. They justified their actions internally as necessary intervention. History was heavy with such justifications. Ashaf faced the most difficult decision of the conflict. Intervening would risk validating accusations of human expansionism. Not intervening would condemn entire populations to retribution. She chose intervention, but she chose it sideways. Human ships did not confront the coalition directly. Instead, they moved ahead of it, quietly evacuating vulnerable populations under the guise of routine transit assistance. At the same time, human analysts released predictive models showing the coalition's projected path and its likely humanitarian impact. The models were shared with assemblage councils, peripheral polities, and neutral observers simultaneously. The effect was immediate. The coalition's secrecy evaporated. Assemblage councils disavowed the operation publicly, even as they scrambled privately to rein it in. Peripheral species demanded explanations. Neutral observers repositioned assets to document events in real time. Cornered by visibility, the coalition accelerated. The engagement that followed was chaotic and ugly, not because of scale, but because of misalignment. Human ships moved to block approaches to inhabited worlds, using gravitational modulation to force the coalition into less populated corridors. The coalition responded with brute force, damaging several human vessels and destroying infrastructure that could not be repositioned in time. Lives were lost. Asha felt each loss as a physical weight, a familiar ache that sharpened her resolve without blinding it. She authorized direct engagement when it became clear that containment alone would not suffice. The battle did not resemble the Talem demonstration or the relay hub seizure. This was closer, messier, fought in proximity to worlds that could not afford collateral damage. Human ships absorbed punishment to shield evacuation routes. Assemblage coalition vessels found their firepower constrained by the need to avoid striking observers and non-combatants. The conflict ended not with surrender, but with exhaustion. The coalition fragmented under conflicting priorities and withdrew piecemeal. Several vessels were disabled and later impounded by assemblage authorities eager to distance themselves from the debacle. The aftermath was brutal in its clarity. The coalition's actions, now fully documented, shattered the remaining pretense of unified assemblage intent. Public inquiries proliferated. Member polities demanded safeguards against unilateral enforcement. The concept of automatic compliance, once foundational, was openly questioned. Ithrek Val re-emerged into public discourse, not as a leader but as a witness. He testified before multiple councils, detailing the structural incentives that had enabled the coalition's actions. His words carried weight precisely because he no longer sought authority. Asha addressed humanity again, this time more briefly. We intervened because inaction would have made us complicit. We accept the cost of that choice. We will continue to accept it. There was no triumph in her tone. There was accountability. In the weeks that followed, assemblage governance entered a reformation phase that no one could fully control. Oversight mechanisms were revised to require multilateral consent. Enforcement mandates were narrowed. Experimental shared councils were established in regions where human and assemblage interests intersected most intensely. Progress was uneven. In some areas, reform stalled under resistance from entrenched interests. In others, it accelerated beyond initial proposals, driven by local enthusiasm. Humanity participated where invited, declined where its presence would overshadow local agency. Asha spent long hours reviewing reports of both success and failure. She noted patterns, adjusted support, and resisted the temptation to centralize. The greatest danger now was becoming what they had opposed. One-night cycle, as the unanswerable weight drifted between stars, Kesh joined Asha in the commons. Neither spoke for a long moment. "We are being watched differently now," Kesh said finally. "Not as a problem to be managed, as a reference." Asha nodded. "That carries responsibility. And risk," Kesh added. "Yes," Asha said, "but it always has." She thought of the countless hands across human space, repairing ships, tending crops, arguing in councils, raising children who would inherit a universe less certain but more negotiable than the one before. She thought of the assemblage not as an enemy, but as a structure in transition, struggling under its own mass. Gravity did not disappear when systems changed. It redistributed. The conflict was no longer about survival alone. It was about stewardship, about proving that endurance could evolve into care without curdling into control. Humanity stood at that threshold, unyielding not because it refused to change, but because it refused to forget the cost of being overlooked. The universe watched, not silently, but attentively, as a species long underestimated continued to demonstrate that strength was not measured by how much weight one could impose, but by how much one was willing to carry without letting go. The Reformation did not announce itself as an ending. It arrived the way seasons did, unevenly, with sudden frosts and unexpected thaws. For a time, no one could say with confidence whether the assemblage was healing or simply learning to mask its fractures. Humanity continued to act as it always had through the conflict, not waiting for permission, not claiming destiny, but responding to what was in front of it with an insistence on accountability that had become instinct rather than strategy. Asha Verind felt the change most acutely in what no longer arrived. The constant stream of crisis alerts slowed. Requests shifted in tone from urgent to consultative. Where once assemblage officials had spoken in the language of compliance, they now spoke in drafts and proposals. The unanswerable weight, still moving, still vigilant, began to feel less like a spearhead and more like a keystone, holding tension rather than directing it. The moment that history would later mark as the inflection point was deceptively small. An assemblage charter revision, circulated for comment rather than ratified by decree, contained a single altered clause. Peripheral species were no longer defined by proximity to the assemblage center, but by self-declared participation. It was a subtle shift, buried in procedural language, but it broke a logic that had stood for centuries. Human analysts caught it within minutes. So did assemblage hardliners, who immediately began drafting objections. But objections required consensus, and consensus was now slower, more deliberate. Debates spilled into public forums. Peripheral polities spoke openly about their experiences. Comparisons were drawn, names were remembered. Asha watched the debate unfold without intervening. She had learned when to step back. Influence exercised too often became control, and control was a gravity she refused to wield. Instead, she turned her attention inward. Humanity had changed in the process of changing others. The distributed systems built under pressure now had momentum of their own. Some argued for formalization, for declaring a unified human framework that could negotiate as an equal bloc. Others warned that doing so would recreate the very hierarchies they had resisted. Asha convened one last council aboard the unanswerable weight, smaller than before, composed of people who had disagreed with her in meaningful ways. Engineers, diplomats, logistics coordinators, educators. No commanders. "We are being invited to define ourselves," Asha said, "not by force but by expectation. That is a heavier burden." An educator from a frontier world spoke first. "People want clarity. They want to know what we are becoming." "We are becoming accountable," Kesh said, to each other if nothing else. Accountability requires structure, someone else countered. Without it, responsibility diffuses. Asha listened, letting the arguments circle. When she spoke again, it was not to resolve them, but to reframe them. We do not need a single answer. We need a method for answering repeatedly without erasing dissent. Silence followed, thoughtful rather than tense. The assemblage failed not because it was large, Asha continued, but because it treated order as static. We must not make that mistake. Whatever we build must be allowed to change faster than it can calcify. The council did not vote. It outlined principles instead. Transparency over efficiency when the two conflicted. Reversibility in decision-making. Local authority constrained only by demonstrated harm, not hypothetical risk. No permanent centers. It was imperfect. It was human. As these principles circulated, adopted and adapted by different regions, Asha began transferring responsibilities. The unanswerable weight offloaded coordination roles to regional nodes. Advisory requests were redirected. Her name appeared less frequently in briefings, more often in footnotes. Some noticed. Rumors circulated that she was withdrawing, that she had grown tired or fearful of becoming what she opposed. Asha did not correct them. Motives mattered less than outcomes. Her final exchange with Ithrek Val occurred quietly. He had been invited to observe a shared council session between multiple species, one of the first of its kind. Afterward, he requested a private channel. "You have done something irreversible," Ithrek said without accusation. "So have you," Asha replied. "I no longer know what the assemblage will become," Ithrek said. "Neither do I," Asha said. "That is not failure." Ithrek's projection shifted, softer now. "You could have seized power, many believed you would. I was never interested in power," Asha said, "only in weight. Power seeks to move others. Weight forces you to consider where you stand." "And now?" Ithrek asked. "And now I step aside," Asha said, "so others can feel it for themselves." Their unanswerable weight changed course for the first time without strategic necessity. It moved toward a sparsely populated system near the edge of mapped space, a place of quiet stars and long orbits. There were no assemblage patrols there, no human colonies, only survey beacons left decades earlier and never updated. Kesh accompanied Asha to the observation blister one last time. The ship's hum was familiar, comforting in its constancy. "What will you do?" Kesh asked. Asha considered. "Listen, document, intervene only if forgetting becomes dangerous." Kesh smiled faintly. "That sounds like retirement." "That sounds like stewardship," Asha said. They stood together, watching a star slowly rotate into view, its light unremarkable and therefore beautiful. Behind them, the ship adjusted systems, redistributing load, preparing for a future that did not require a single hand on the tiller. Across human space and beyond it, the effects of what had been set in motion continued to unfold. The assemblage did not collapse. It did not remain the same. It became contested terrain, negotiated daily by those who lived within its reach. Humanity was no longer peripheral, but neither was it dominant. It was present, undeniable, and engaged. Children born in the years that followed learned a universe where authority was questioned by default and cooperation required explanation rather than assumption. They learned names not as symbols of command, but as reminders of choices made and costs accepted. Somewhere in the vast record of interstellar history, analysts would debate whether the conflict should be classified as a war, a reform, or an anomaly. They would argue over causality and intent. They would miss the simplest truth. Humanity had not won by overpowering an ancient system. It had endured long enough and deliberately enough to force that system to feel its own weight. And in doing so, it had proven that unyielding hands were not those that clenched forever, but those that could hold fast, release when needed, and remain open without forgetting the burns that taught them why they held on in the first place.